In the mountains of central Italy, a huge Allied artillery barrage provides covering fire for a group of elite soldiers, preparing to go into action for the first time together. They belong to a covert US-Canadian special force, soon to be nicknamed by the enemy as the Black Devils, for their deadly night-fighting expertise. As they make their way towards Monte la Difensa, a vital mountain stronghold at the center of Germany's winter line, ahead is an impossible assault against a considerable and determined force. But as they begin their ascent, they are already battling extreme mountainous and winter conditions.
By the end of 1943, the Allies were about halfway up the Italian peninsula. They were getting very close to the capital city of Rome, but they had to break through the winter line to get to that city.
More than 4 years into the war, the tide is turning against Hitler's Germany. The Americans are pouring hundreds and thousands of troops into Great Britain as part of the buildup for the Allied invasion of Europe. On the Eastern Front, the Soviet Union has unleashed a massive winter offensive against German forces. In the Mediterranean, Hitler's former ally, Italy, has surrendered. Now the Allies are fighting to liberate the country from German occupation. But the enemy mounts a dogged defense, making expert use of mountainous terrain to keep the Allies at bay. Now bogged down, the Allies need to get things moving again, and fast. Under the codename Operation Raincoat, the Allies will launch a vigorous, sustained assault against German defenses south of the capital.
The purpose of Operation Raincoat was to break open the German winter line. And to do that, the real linchpin was Monte la Difensa. If they captured Monte la Difensa, that would crack open the entire German defenses and open the road to Rome. If the mission failed, the result could be that the war itself was extended for months or even a year or two more.
Under Operation Raincoat, 3 simultaneous Allied assaults will be made up the mountain. The British will make Monte Cammino on the left, while the Americans will attack Monte Maggiore on the right. But the Black Devils, as yet untested in battle, must assault the most dangerous of all, the vital central position of Monte la Difensa. First, they have to scale an almost vertical 200-meter cliff face, in complete darkness and treacherous conditions, carrying all their own equipment, 90 pounds per man. The men must continue their climb, totally undetected from the patrolling German sentries on the summit. If the Black Devils manage to reach the top safely, then the hard work begins. The men will have to single-handedly take on about 400 heavily armed defenders, who will have dug themselves in and set up with a wall of iron MG-42s, mortars, and a virtually limitless supply of grenades. The only way to do this is a deadly mass assault involving close-quarter fighting and hand-to-hand combat. If the men of the Black Devils successfully complete this operation, next, they have to press on to a further objective, Monte la Rementanea. Only then will they have completed their mission and secured the high ground that opens the road to Rome. Bill's story is with a reconnaissance party sent to look for routes up the mountain. As a young platoon sergeant with the Winnipeg Light Infantry, he'd volunteered for parachute training to be in the thick of the action and found himself posted to the Black Devils. Smart and organized, he was soon appointed to Headquarters Detachment. Now he passes grim evidence of earlier failed attempts to take the mountain.
I could see bodies that had been lying there for a month. That was, I believe, the last effort that had been made on La Difensa. The survivors were under fire the whole time and couldn't go out and get the dead. There were bodies everywhere.
Sergeant. Story's in the middle of an expertly constructed killing zone.
By 1943, the Germans had really learned how to build a good defensive line. They laid tens of thousands of mines in front of the winter line. They built up machine gun outposts with interlocking fields of fire, barbed wire, and artillery. There wasn't a place you could move in front of the winter line that the Germans couldn't take a shot at you. And it was into the teeth of this defensive juggernaut that they were sending the Black Devils.
It seems the Germans have every way up the mountain covered. But Bill's story and the scouts identify one route that could be used to outflank German defenses from the north. A route that at first seems impossible, even crazy.
All the normal paths had been tried, and the Germans had pretty much sealed off the top of the mountain. So there really was only one way to go, straight up the cliff face.
It's a plan of almost suicidal daring. One that only a unit with the Black Devil's background and training would even consider. This elite unit, officially known as the 1st Special Service Force, was originally earmarked for operations in extreme winter conditions behind enemy lines. Every man has been carefully selected for his experience of rugged outdoor conditions. Many are former lumberjacks, forest rangers, and hunters from the North American wilderness, now trained intensively in the art of mountain and winter warfare.
The original goal was to have them attack the Germans in Norway, and so they went through serious training in Montana up in the mountains, climbing every day, marching through the mountains, and driving themselves to physical exhaustion so they could do exactly what they ended up having to do in Italy.
Canadian Joe Dauphiné from the prairies of Manitoba is a natural soldier with a mischievous streak, who's already been busted twice from corporal back to private. He's been selected to join a 4-man team led by the force's 2 best climbers, Sergeants Howard Van Osdale and Tom Fenton. They will scale the mountain with ropes, which the other men will use to haul themselves up.
Van and Tom went up to the top with their ropes, and we tied ours to the end of theirs. Van and Tom took those ropes all the way to the top of the mountain.
Going up the mountain under the cover of darkness was the only real option. But it's a massive gamble. If they're spotted on the way up, the mission's over before it's begun. So they need complete noise and light discipline. They needed to make sure nothing rattled and nothing shone. Every soldier relies on planning and preparation to give them the edge. But they also know that luck will always play its part. You just have to hope it goes your way.
Just below the summit is a 200-foot cliff, rising almost vertically at 70 degrees. As they reach the top of the ridge, the scouts take a terrible chance.
Van told me they couldn't resist peeking over the edge. They had to get up a little higher to have a look-see, and that's when they saw a German sentry walking away from the point. Just imagine if the bugger would have seen him. That would have blown the whole show.
The Black Devils have had their moment of luck. If they'd been spotted, they could have expected a swift and ruthless response. The heights around La Difensa are held by around 400 men, including those of the 104th Panzer Grenadier Regiment, hardened veterans of the fighting in North Africa and Sicily. They're well dug into the mountaintop. They've even blasted defensive positions from the sheer rock. They avoid the crests themselves, which are a magnet for enemy fire, but occupy well-camouflaged positions strategically placed around the summit. Their machine guns and mortars are pre-sighted to smother every avenue of approach. This means they have worked out the exact range and bearing and can hit them blindfolded if need be. But no one guards the sheer drop on the northeastern side. They think no one could be crazy enough to come that way. Now Dauphiné and the 100 men of the 1st Company are ascending the supposedly impossible route to the summit. Amongst them, American Private Ken Betts, an orphan with no family and nothing to lose, who volunteered for $50 a month extra pay. And Canadian Sergeant Don McKinnon. 2 years ago, he lied about his age to enlist at 16 and follow his elder brother into the military. Now he's wondering if that was such a great idea.
That's when I started to think, what am I doing on this godforsaken mountain so far from home? Thinking about my family back in Montreal and knowing that they didn't know where the hell I was. I was just 18.
Conditions on the mountain are treacherous. As McKinnon, Betts, and First Company climb the mountain, American artillery provides covering fire, pounding the summit from positions of up to 10 miles away. 22,000 shells rain down in a single hour.
Shells passed overhead like speeding freight trains in both directions. It was literally deafening.
Over 900 guns were used to bombard the mountain as the men climbed. As one of the Black Devils said, the mountain looked like it was on fire.
The bombardment keeps German heads down. If the raiding party are spotted now, the assault could quickly become a massacre.
If the Germans had spotted them as they were climbing up the mountain, there was very little the Black Devils could do to protect themselves. The Germans could drop hand grenades on them, could shoot down the edge of the cliff, could fire machine guns down on them, could drop rocks on them if they felt like it. And the Black Devils could do nothing but hang there and keep climbing.
But the high-risk gamble pays off. After about 30 minutes of rope climbing, Don McKinnon and First Company reach the summit, unchallenged. It's an incredible achievement.
The Germans had no real reason to sort of get up to the edge of the cliff and peer over to see if someone's climbing. It was an impossible cliff. No one could be climbing it.
Captain Rothland's First Company is soon joined on the mountain by Second and Third Companies, 300 men in total. Third Company is on the right flank, Second Company is in the center, and First Company is on the left. The first crucial phase of the mission has been completed. Now the men prepare for the next stage, a close-quarters nighttime assault on which not only victory, but their survival depends. As the Black Devils prepare to go into combat, many are close to exhaustion after their epic climb.
The Black Devils had to sneak into place, climb a sheer cliff of several thousand feet, and then go straight into combat. It was like running a marathon followed by a firefight.
Vision would have been impaired, they'd be breathing quickly, and their coordination would suffer. This would definitely have affected their ability to fight. It becomes difficult to move quietly and aim a weapon. It's for moments like this that Special Forces put such a high premium on physical fitness and training.
They can take comfort from the fact that when the shooting begins, they can call on one of the most effective infantry weapons of the entire war.
This is the Garand M1 rifle. It was gas-operated and semi-automatic. You could fit a bayonet to the front. If it had its faults, it was a bit on the heavy side. The main vice with the Garand, though, was that users could suffer from Garand thumb. When soldiers loaded the weapon, they'd push down and the bolt would fly forward, taking the thumb with it. The Garand was a complicated design, but it was incredibly robust, and the American GIs absolutely loved it. And more importantly, it had amazing stopping power, and that's why it did well on the battlefield.
"300 men of the Black Devils have reached the summit of Monte la Difensa in complete darkness and pouring rain. Now they begin the second phase of the operation, fixing bayonets to their Garands They sneak forwards to make a surprise assault on the German positions. Their extraordinary nighttime climb has won them total surprise. Right on cue, Allied artillery has moved its fire onto more distant targets to avoid hitting the Black Devils. Experienced German defenders know it means an infantry attack is imminent. They pour fire into the darkness, using their pre-sighted guns to hit mountain trails to the east, where they expect the attack to come from. But the trails are empty. The Black Devils are already on the mountain and closing in. 18-year-old Sergeant Don McKinnon is with 1st Company on the left flank.
We were virtually on top of the German positions when someone kicked a stone loose.
Scout Howard Van Osdale fires the first shot.
All hell broke loose.
Joe Dauphiné caught up with the scouts as they struggled to find cover from the firefight.
Stuff was really flying around there. The German fire was pretty heavy, but I don't think they knew what they were shooting at or really believed what was happening.
The Germans have been caught off guard, but are quick to react. They occupy a ragged chain of defensive posts behind the crest, which the Black Devils must take one by one. But first, they must win the firefight, keep the Germans on the back foot through sheer weight of lead. Together, their 3 companies have the potential to lay down an awesome 36,000 rounds per minute, thanks to a high ratio of automatic weapons and over a year of intensive training. August 1942, Fort William Henry Harrison, Montana. Under the command of U.S. Army Lieutenant Colonel Robert Frederick, a unique multinational commando force began training for an exceptional mission. Christened the 1st Special Service Force, it was the first unit in history in which Canadian and American soldiers served side by side.
People were seeing that these kind of elite units were extremely useful. The commandos in Britain, the SAS in North Africa, and so they wanted to create more of them. But there was also a little bit of a national competition. The British had their special forces, and now the Canadians and Americans wanted to create their own.
The men were subjected to a relentless training regimen, focused on weapon skills, mountaineering, parachuting, and demolitions. But above all, they trained in physical fitness.
We were all groomed and really sharp, even down to the last man. I definitely reached my peak in those years with the Force.
It is the birth of one of the world's first modern special forces units.
The Black Devils were certainly one of the best units around, certainly in terms of their mountaineering abilities and the things that they had been trained to do. I don't know that there was a parallel in any military among the Allied armies.
After more than a year of training, when the men were finally given the chance to take on the Germans in Italy, the highly honed fighting force was like a coiled serpent, primed to strike. Now all the Black Devils of the 2nd Battalion are at the top of Monte la Difensa. Their next task is to eliminate enemy positions near the crest, held by more than 200 German veterans. The 3 companies fan out. Canadians Joe Dauphiné, Don McKinnon, and American Ken Betts are with 1st Company on the left flank. Each knows that retreat is not an option.
If the plan failed, the Black Devils were almost certainly going to be wiped out. They had nowhere to go if any one of the things they were doing failed. The only place they could retreat to was 3,000 feet straight down.
The Black Devil's plan now relies on aggression and momentum to hit the enemy hard before he has time to react. Sergeant Don McKinnon leads his squad towards the German positions on the ridge, using fire and maneuver, which remains key to modern infantry tactics.
Fire maneuver tactics is when a soldier or section puts down suppressive fire while the other soldier or section advances. They rush forward a short distance, what's known as a tactical bound, and then swap over, so the men that were advancing drop down and give covering fire as the other men move up. You do this until you're close enough to make the final assault.
Each 16-man squad gets fire support from its own light machine gun. Ken Betts, the hard-nosed American fighting for better pay, mans his squad's .30 caliber Browning. It's his first taste of combat, and he lets fly.
We got our machine gun activated and turned it loose on anything that remotely resembled a crowd. It seemed like it didn't take long to run through our few belts of ammo. Let me tell you, they always said that there aren't any atheists in foxholes. That's true, you know.
For all the training they had gone through, this was really one of the very first operations the Black Devils carried out. So a lot of the soldiers were very green and inexperienced. They had to learn very quickly on the side of that cliff.
Fighting at night is extremely difficult. It affects communication, identification, and navigation. Understanding your objectives completely and good leadership are vital. The Black Devils are a highly trained unit with excellent morale, but almost no combat experience. Units like this often take very heavy casualties in the first action because they're enthusiastic to the point of recklessness. But for this particular assault, that was exactly what was required.
It was hairy up there for about an hour. We had never been in combat before, but our training took over.
Betts soon runs out of ammo for his .30 caliber Browning machine gun and takes the weapon of a fallen comrade.
I grabbed a rifle from one of the guys who was lying there, dead, and advanced. I think it was because I was scared and very, very busy that I don't really remember too much of what happened that first few minutes. I don't think anybody really knew what was going on.
Even though they're combat rookies, Betts and the rest of the Black Devils respond with aggression and determination.
Let me tell you something. You have 1 second. It's just about all 1 second of being a green soldier. And after that first second, you're either a seasoned veteran or you're dead.
Private Joe Dauphiné, who led the climb up the mountain, is now on the force's left flank, trying to get forward in the face of heavy enemy fire. For a second, he breaks cover.
Of course, that's when they opened up on me. They were putting out a lot of lead.
Dauphiné comes under fire from the dreaded MG-42 machine gun.
The MG-42, the German general-purpose machine gun, had a murderous rate of fire. At 1,500 rounds a minute, it sounded like ripping fabric. In fact, it was called Hitler's buzzsaw. The machine gun was at the center of all German defensive planning. It would have several alternate camouflage firing positions, and because of its long range, it would be the first weapon to open fire. Its superbly constructed tripod and optical sights allowed the MG-42 to take on targets at 3,000 yards in daylight.
The MG-42 was a terrible weapon. I didn't have a chance. They plugged me. I don't know if it was the shock of the bullet hitting me or what, but I passed out. I don't know how long it was, but I came to. I had enough sense to lay absolutely still. I didn't move a muscle, and when they raised their fire to take on the guys behind me, I made my move and got the hell out of there. Once I found cover, I looked at my wounded arm. I also noticed my rifle, and all I had left was the barrel. I got one through the arm, but the rifle got the worst of it.
His rifle saved his life. It's an incredible escape. Still under heavy enemy fire, he makes his way to the rear to look for medical aid. As dawn approaches, the Black Devils close to within 100 yards of their target, the caves and bunkers that defend the summit of Monte la Difensa.
This is where their many months of training pays off. Concentrated, rapid fire keeps the enemy's heads down, while a flanking attack gets into position. If you don't have direct or indirect fire, you need to get close, post grenades, and smash it.
much of the fighting is at extreme close quarters.
It must have been stunning for the Germans, because here they are getting bombarded by artillery. And then suddenly there are screaming Allied soldiers jumping into their fortifications with them.
The Force have two favorites for close-in work, a gun and a knife. The first, the Thompson submachine gun, was made famous during the gang wars of Prohibition.
This is the M1 Thompson submachine gun, designed in the World War I as a trench buster. This weapon is a punchy little number. Fires a .45 caliber round. Doesn't necessarily have the range, but on close quarter battles, it's what you want. It'll do the job.
For extreme close quarter fighting, some Forcemen turn to a uniquely lethal piece of kit, designed by their very own commanding officer.
In 1942, Colonel Frederick produced this, the V-42 fighting knife. V stood for victory, but members of the 1st Special Service Force just knew it as the Force knife. The blade was made of high carbon steel and double-edged. It had a thumbprint for extra control and grip. The handle was made of leather, had a sharp skull crusher on the end of the pommel.
It takes a certain kind of man to kill another man with a knife or with bare hands. There were those in the Force that relished this type of work. We loved to scrap. Most of the guys enjoyed it.
The hand-to-hand combat the Black Devils learnt must have given them confidence. But killing someone with a knife up close, rather than shooting them from afar, is something very different. But these guys thrived on it.
The Black Devils' sudden ferocious onslaught turns the tide. German outposts begin to pull back. But taking prisoners while the confused fighting still rages is fraught with danger. Seeing Germans with their arms raised, Captain Rothlin and Private Gath stand up. Sid Gath's close friend, 18-year-old Sergeant Don McKinnon, had a ringside seat for what happened next.
Sid rose up to cover two Germans coming in to surrender with their hands raised. And he was instantly hit by a machine gun burst.
McKinnon's company commander, Captain Rothlin, is killed by the same burst.
He had died instantly. It really stunned me.
The loss of friends like Sid Gath and respected leaders like Bill Rothlin is a serious blow to the Black Devils. They're on a short fuse as other German captives start to come in.
Before we knew it, we had a bag full of prisoners. One of them was wounded, and he didn't want to walk down the mountain. One of our men who spoke German said, "You start walking down the hill, or we're gonna let you have it." So, they moved on down the hill.
As dawn breaks, the surviving Germans retreat towards Monte la Rementanea and the saddle between Monte la Difensa and Camino. The Force has achieved a stunning tactical victory, one that many thought was impossible. They have completed Phase 1 of the operation and taken the stronghold of Monte la Difensa.
It was fast. For the Germans, it had been a complete surprise. It was over in 2 hours.
The Black Devils count 75 German dead, but they have suffered heavy losses. 20 men killed and 160 wounded. Now this depleted force must hold the mountain before moving on to take their second objective.
They had succeeded. They had climbed the cliff. They had driven the Germans off it. And yet here they were still stuck on top of this hill, exposed to the elements, fighting desperately to hold on to what they could, and worried that despite all their success, they would still lose.
The Black Devils are supposed to be advancing on their second objective, Monte la Rementanea. But instead, 9 hours into the mission, they find themselves pinned down by a furious German counterattack. Fast, sudden counterattacks are the hallmark of the German army. Their experienced enemy is determined to throw the Black Devils back down the mountain. German forces in Italy are led by Field Marshal Kesselring, one of Hitler's most gifted defensive generals. Nicknamed Smiling Albert, His strategy is to force the Allies into a war of attrition, bleeding them dry as they are forced to assault successive lines of mountain defenses. He has around 250,000 men under his command, including elite units such as the 1st Parachute Division and combat veterans of the 15th Panzer Grenadier Division, who hold La Difensa. Now German artillery fire rains down on the force positions. Above the din, the scream of rockets is heard, revealing the enemy's deployed one of its most feared weapons. Introduced in 1941, the Nebelwerfer was a 6-barreled rocket launcher with a range of over 6,000 yards. Fired by remote control, it unleashed all its rockets in a single devastating barrage. 6 rockets in 10 seconds. Allied infantry call it the Screaming Mimi. It's Don McKinnon's first time under artillery fire, and he and his men scramble for cover.
We were in the old German positions in the Saucer. The Germans, of course, had the exact range of it. They set up their mortars and their rocket launchers, and they let us have it.
Under relentless bombardment and harassing machine gun fire, casualties begin to mount.
We had many wounded. There were a lot wounded from the granite. Machine gun rounds had been hitting into the rocks, and granite chips were flying into men's faces.
Now the sun's up. The force is exposed to the next phase of the German counterattack. Snipers hidden among the rocks. Staff Sergeant Bill Story, who took part in the initial reconnaissance, arrives on the mountain with his headquarters detachment. He soon learns to keep his head down.
Each German unit had a certain percentage of men who were specifically trained as snipers, who went to sniper school. We lost a number of men to these snipers.
Sniping is an art form. Not everyone can do it. It's the perfect offensive tactic for the Germans because it allows them to pin down entire companies with just a handful of skilled marksmen. Just like sniper teams today, the Germans worked in pairs. One to spot, one to shoot, switching roles every 30 minutes or so to stay fresh. Primary targets were officers, then specialist troops like heavy weapons crews. A good sniper doesn't shoot until he's certain to hit. Otherwise, he risks giving away his position for nothing. The best snipers are not just excellent marksmen, but masters of concealment, patience, and sound tactical judgment.
The topography at Monte La Difensa lent itself to perfect sniping terrain, high ground, and lots of places to hide.
German snipers are armed with a rifle that has a long pedigree and a production run of millions.
The KR-98 was a German bolt-action Mauser. It was based on a simple World War I design and was the German soldier's personal weapon. It could be fitted with a bayonet, telescopic sight, or even a rifle grenade. Even your bog-standard soldier could use this weapon to devastating effect. This weapon was easy to use and maintain, and very accurate. It fired a 7.92 round and packed a real punch. I'm going to prove how accurate this weapon was by firing at 50 yards, trying to knock that egg off the post. This is 50 yards, but the best World War II German snipers could guarantee a headshot at 400 yards, 8 times this range.
The Black Devils are supposed to be advancing on their second objective, Monte La Rementanea. But snipers and rocket fire have got them pinned down. With communications knocked out, Commanding Officer Colonel Frederick climbs a mountain to find out what's going on.
You never would know where he would pop up. You'd be out there on patrol, getting the hell kicked out of you, and he'd pop up in the middle of it. That was Frederick. He was wounded 8 times during the war.
Colonel Robert Frederick's an interesting case. He did everything that his men did. He climbed the mountains they climbed. He led the operations that they participated in. And like a lot of special forces, that's really critical. They're very close-knit, and so the officers have to lead from the front if they're going to get their men to do the incredible feats that they do.
But leadership from the front is not without risk.
This could raise morale, and he could take control of things on the ground as it happened. But he may lose the bigger picture and expose himself to danger. But remember, Colonel Frederick was operating within the technological limits of his age. Radios could be unreliable, and telephone lines often got broken by artillery fire. There were no surveillance drones or helmet cams to put him in the picture, so getting in there was probably the right decision, and certainly a brave one.
From the top of the mountain, Colonel Frederick gets a better picture of the situation, but it doesn't look good. The Black Devils need to get forward to take the second objective, Monte la Rementanea. But as they try to advance, they come under heavy flanking fire from the heights still in enemy hands. By the end of the day, one of the American 142nd Infantry Regiments holds Monte Maggiore to the north. But the British are thrown back from the summit of Monte Camino under heavy fire. Until it's taken, the Black Devils are stuck. The force spends 2 long days and freezing nights on the mountain, under relentless, harassing fire. They're isolated, exhausted, and desperately low on ammunition and water. All their supplies have to be hauled up steep mountain trails under fire. At any moment, a determined German counterattack could sweep them from the mountain. There will be no let-up until the British can take Monte Camino. But there's no back door for them. The terrain forces them to make a direct frontal assault. For each advance, they're met with a hail of accurate mortar and machine gun fire. Former Staff Sergeant Bill Story has just received the unit's first ever battlefield commission, helping to fill the shoes of one of their many officer casualties. He's with regimental headquarters, with a commanding view of the action.
I stood on top of La Difensa, looking toward Camino and watched the Brits. They would get virtually up to the top of Camino, and there might be one man left, and then he would go down. I saw them do it not once, but several times.
Typically, Allied units would be able to call on air power to hit German defenses with bombs, rockets, and machine guns. But British and American fighter bombers have been grounded by bad weather. Colonel Frederick's situation report to headquarters reveals how precarious their position has become.
Men are getting in bad shape from fatigue, exposure, and cold. German snipers are giving us hell. The locations we hold are going to be uncomfortable as long as the enemy holds the north slopes of Camino.
The situation is desperate. It leaves Colonel Frederick only one option: to attack. Finally, the Black Devils have got enough ammunition, supplies, and reinforcements up the mountain to launch a second assault. The Black Devils and the British are being hammered by the German mortars and machine guns, dug into the saddle between Difensa and Camino. Now Colonel Frederick sends 4 companies forward to clear them out. To support the assault, the force is able to call on a devastating new weapon.
The rocket launcher, or bazooka, named after a musical instrument that a famous comic used of the time. The 1st Special Service Force were the first guys to take delivery of this. It was pretty easy to assemble.
It was a two-man firing team, one guy to pull the trigger and one guy to load it. It was his job also to clear behind, because the backblast was fierce. GIs were taught to fire at the wheels on tanks to put them out of action. It fired an armor-piercing round and could go through 4 inches of steel.
The bazooka came to us hot off the press, you might say. We got some from the very first production run, and they basically wrote the manual for it from our experience.
What the men found was that the bazooka had some pretty big limitations. To penetrate the armor of German tanks, the firer had to get within about 50 yards. This, plus the fact that the backblast immediately gave away your position, meant bazooka work was regarded as one of the most dangerous jobs going. One thing they did discover, though, is that it was very handy for taking out enemy bunkers.
With bayonets fixed, the Black Devils advance. The saddle is defended by well-entrenched MG-42s, snipers, and mortars. In several hours of brutal close-quarter fighting, they clear the Germans from their positions. It paves the way for the Black Devils to attempt their final objective, Monte la Rementanea. The Black Devils are already down more than 400 men. A third of their strength has been killed, wounded, or lost through exhaustion. Now, they must steel themselves for one final bloody dawn assault that will decide the outcome of the entire operation. The Black Devils have scaled the mountain, taken Monte la Difensa, and endured 3 days of punishment holding its summit. Now, they have the chance to go forward and finish the job. The 1st Special Service Force begins its attack, but the men are surprised by what they encounter.
The Rementanea action in itself was not a difficult one. We lost some men, but the Germans really didn't have any heart to hang around.
The Germans, worn down by many days of combat, are pulling back. Late the next day, the British finally take Monte Camino. The last of the mountain peaks is in Allied hands, and the road to Cassino, the gateway to Rome, is open. After 6 days at the summit, under fire, frozen, and starved of sleep, the 1st Special Service Force leaves the front line. The unit has pulled off one of the most remarkable nighttime assaults of World War II. They've defied the odds to capture the strategically vital mountain and hold it against all comers. On their way down, the Forcemen command newfound respect.
The 36th Infantry Division was dug in down at the bottom of Difensa. They'd been trying to get up the mountain for about 3 months, but had never gotten to the top. When we arrived in the area, some were saying, "Boy, we sure do feel sorry for you fellas, and bye-bye, nice knowing you." And that was just before we went up. But they were real quiet when we came back down. They couldn't believe we did it.
But inevitably, the cost was high. 73 Black Devils had been killed, and 313 wounded. Another 116 were hospitalized for exhaustion.
By the end of the operation, the Black Devils were in a pretty sorry state. They had been fighting for several days. They had climbed a major mountain. And so the unit that sort of straggled off the mountain, although successful, was extremely worn down.
Among the survivors of the spectacular mission were Canadians Bill Story, Don McKinnon, and the wounded Joe Dauphiné. Americans Ken Betts and their gallant leader, Robert T. Frederick. He later became, at 37, the youngest division commander in the U.S. Army, and would be remembered as one of the few generals to serve on the front line, shoulder to shoulder with his men. Colonel Frederick's elite 1st Special Service Force never lost a battle in World War II. They would spend the rest of the winter fighting, clearing a path for the Allied advance on Rome. In June 1944, just a few days before D-Day, the Black Devils became one of the first Allied units to enter Italy's capital. Following the successful raid on La Difensa, their fighting through Italy and later France, the Black Devils earned themselves a reputation as a hard-hitting elite unit with a fearsome combat record. But as the war in Europe entered its final months, with Hitler's Germany facing total defeat, it was decided there was no longer a need for its specialized role. Canadian and American soldiers were ordered to rejoin their respective armies. On December 5th, 1944, the Black Devils formed up for the last time.
It was the saddest day of my life, I think. When they ordered, "Americans stand fast, Canadians fall out in a column of threes," there were tears falling all over the bloody place, among all these tough bastards.
It was more devastating because we were such a cohesive unit, and now we weren't going to be together again. That was a sad day.
The 1st Special Service Force existed for little more than 2 years. Today, they are largely forgotten heroes, from what many consider World War II's forgotten front. But their remarkable feats and their reputation for skill, courage, and ferocity are, for those that know, the stuff of military legend. Their legacy of uncommon valor, as well as trailblazing tools, tactics, and training, paved the way for the U.S. and Canadian special forces that serve their countries today.